They're calling it a trend now. A major television host called it that. Commentators call it that. The word they use is trend, as if walking away from someone who harms you is a fashion cycle, something people do because they saw it online, something that will pass when the next aesthetic arrives. But that is not what is actually happening. And the neurological reason why will change how you see every person who ever went silent on you. Here is what most people miss. The human brain does not process social threat the way it processes physical threat. It processes them as the same threat. When someone repeatedly invalidates you, dismisses you, crosses boundaries they have been told exist, your amygdala, the threat detection center, does not file that under relationship stress. It files it under predator. The same cortisol spike, the same hypervigilance, the same mobilization of the sympathetic nervous system that you would feel if a stranger cornered you in a parking garage. The difference is, in the parking garage, you run. In the relationship, you are told to stay, and your nervous system starts to break because it cannot resolve the contradiction. This is the part where the self-help industry tells you that going no contact is an avoidant attachment pattern, that it is unresolved trauma, that it is emotional immaturity dressed up as boundaries. And for a long time, that explanation felt right because it matched what you were already afraid of. That your silence meant you were broken, that your disappearance was a failure of courage, that the people who stayed were the strong ones, and you were the one who could not handle discomfort. The therapy language around this is careful. It speaks of repair and communication and working through things together. It assumes that the problem is a lack of skill, not a lack of safety. It assumes that if you just explained yourself clearly enough, the other person would finally understand. But there is a clinical term for what happens when someone keeps explaining themselves to a person who keeps demonstrating that explanation does not work. It is called learned helplessness. And it is not a communication problem. It is a threat assessment problem. The self-help narrative also loves the word closure, as if the no-contact person is running from closure, as if one more conversation, one more letter, one more attempt at mutual understanding would finally resolve what years of the same dynamic could not. But closure is not something you extract from another person. It is something your brain manufactures internally when the predictive data finally aligns, when the probability of harm drops below the threshold of tolerance, when your nervous system registers that the source of chronic threat is no longer present. That is closure, not a conversation, a calculation. But that is only the surface. The real mechanism is something most people never consider. I will explain it in a moment. Your brain runs a continuous subconscious calculation. It is not emotional. It is mathematical. Every interaction with another person updates a hidden ledger. Not the ledger you keep consciously, the one where you remember the good times and try to balance them against the bad. This is deeper. This is the predictive processing system, and it operates on one question only. Is this person going to harm me again? The brain does not care about intentions. It cares about patterns. It cares about base rates. If someone has harmed you 10 times and changed 0 times, your predictive system does not assign a 10% risk. It assigns near certainty. This is where it gets interesting. The predictive brain does not weight recent events more heavily than distant ones unless there is evidence of genuine change. A single good week does not overwrite a year of patterns. An apology does not recalibrate the model. What recalibrates the model is sustained behavioral change over time. And even then, the brain updates slowly, cautiously, because false negatives in threat detection are more costly than false positives. Better to avoid a safe person than to trust a dangerous one. This is called the negativity bias, and it is not a flaw. It is an evolutionary feature that kept your ancestors alive. The no-contact decision is not an emotional explosion. It is the moment the probability crosses a threshold your nervous system will no longer tolerate. You do not decide to go no contact. Your threat detection system decides for you. And what looks like a sudden cut to the outside world is actually the final frame of a film that has been running for years. The last interaction was not the cause. It was the confirmation. The straw that broke the camel's back was not heavy. It was just the last one. If this makes you defensive, pay closer attention. Because the people who need to hear this the most are the ones who have been told their whole lives that their silence is the problem. Here is what the no contact is a trend narrative gets backwards. The people who stay, the ones who keep showing up to the same dynamics, who keep explaining, who keep hoping this time will be different, are not demonstrating resilience. They are demonstrating conditioned helplessness. Their nervous systems have learned that escape is not an option, that leaving is abandonment, that their own threat signals are overreactions. And so they override the data. They silence the alarm. They stay. And the cost is not just emotional, it is neurological. Chronic activation of the HPA axis, the stress response system, without resolution causes measurable changes in hippocampal volume. It impairs memory consolidation. It disrupts sleep architecture. It primes the immune system for inflammation. Studies on chronic interpersonal stress show elevated inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, the same markers seen in cardiovascular disease. The person who stays in a chronically unsafe relational environment is not being loyal. They are being slowly poisoned by their own physiology. And society calls that strength. There's another layer here that the stay and work it out crowd never addresses. When you override your threat signals repeatedly, you do not just damage your relationship with that person, you damage your relationship with yourself. You teach your nervous system that its own data is untrustworthy, that its own alarms are false. This is called interoceptive confusion, the inability to read your own internal states accurately. And once you lose that, you do not just stay in bad relationships. You stop recognizing bad relationships altogether. You stop recognizing danger. You stop recognizing yourself. There is a specific window in the nervous system where the damage becomes reversible. Most people never reach it. I will tell you why in a moment. The no-contact person is not the broken one. They are the one whose threat detection system is still functioning accurately. They are the one who, at some point, stopped overriding the data. This is not impulsivity. It is the opposite. It is the end of impulsivity, the impulsivity of hope, the impulsivity of giving one more chance, the impulsivity of believing that this time the pattern will break. The no-contact decision is what psychologists call an act of preserved agency. It is the refusal to continue participating in a dynamic where your own safety calculations are treated as irrelevant. And here's the part most people will not say out loud. The people who criticize no-contact the loudest are often the ones who benefit from your continued presence. They are not worried about your healing. They are worried about losing access. They're worried about accountability. They are worried that your silence means they no longer get to define the story. The family member who calls you cold, the ex who says you never gave them a real chance, the friend who frames your boundaries as cruelty. None of them are describing your behavior. They are describing the loss of their own control. And they are using the language of concern to mask the language of entitlement. This is the part where most people tell you to forgive. I'm not going to do that. Forgiveness is a private transaction between you and your own nervous system. It is not a social obligation you owe to someone who never earned it. What happens after no contact is not what the critics describe. They imagine loneliness. They imagine regret. They imagine a person sitting in silence, wondering if they made a mistake. But what actually happens, what the neuroscience confirms, is a gradual downregulation of the sympathetic nervous system. Cortisol levels drop, sleep deepens. The prefrontal cortex, which had been hijacked by threat monitoring, reclaims resources for planning, creativity, and self-reflection. The brain begins to recalibrate its predictive models. It learns that safety is possible, that not every relationship requires defense, that your own signals were trustworthy all along. But there is a catch, and it is the catch that breaks most people. Around 6 weeks into sustained no contact, something happens that feels like intuition but is actually biochemistry. Your brain, which has been running on high alert for months or years, suddenly experiences a drop in adrenaline that registers as emptiness. The absence of threat feels like the absence of connection. Your nervous system, which has learned to associate relational stress with relational presence, confuses peace with loss. It sends you a signal that feels like missing them. It is not. It is withdrawal from a chronic stress state. It is your brain detoxing from a drug it did not know it was on. And if you do not know this is coming, you will mistake it for a sign that you made a mistake. The next part is the one most viewers message me about, because there's a specific window when your brain will try to pull you back. And if you do not know it is coming, you will mistake it for missing them. There's a window in the first 90 days of silence where your nervous system begins to heal. And then, at around 6 weeks, it panics. It confuses the absence of threat with the absence of connection. It tells you that your silence was a mistake, that you were too harsh, that they have changed. This is not intuition. This is withdrawal. And understanding the mechanism is what keeps you from undoing everything you built. That is what we decode next. If this frequency reached you, stay tuned in.